The Bad Batch Season 3 and the show overall is now behind us, and while there's a lot I want to talk about with the finale itself, I also want to say before we get into that I have really enjoyed the show overall, Seasons 1 through 3, and I am going to miss having those episodes to look forward to, even if it means on the flip side that I am going to be able to go to bed at a more reasonable time. I think the finale did a really good job of addressing the two core themes of the show, although I do think in its particulars, there were a few places that I have some issues with how some things were wrapped up, particularly feeling that things were a little bit rushed, or that certain things in how they concluded meant that some of the setup in the past could maybe have been done a little bit differently. But the two themes that I think the finale did a great job of addressing were those of personal choice and identity, which has been such a core theme for the Bad Batch as a whole. We get a few scenes early on in the episode where Hunter, Wrecker, and Crosshair are still moving through the forest after their encounter with the animal and after Vice Admiral Rampart gets captured. Wrecker was really not doing well after the battle, and he only got worse over the course of the episode, so Crosshair was saying that Hunter and Wrecker should go and contact Rex, and then Crosshair would be able to just go into the installation and he would sacrifice himself to help them save Omega somehow. But while I'm glad they addressed this defeatism in Crosshair, I'm also glad that they didn't go the route of actually killing him. Star Wars has way too many examples of redemption being accomplished by going out and getting yourself killed, which I think takes away a lot of the moral responsibility of actually confronting their past and making some sort of amends for it. So Rex is never called, and all three do manage to make it inside the installation together. Echo and Dr. Carr are on Omega's heels as she goes to unleash the Zillo Beast with the help of the other children on their way out of the base. And while Dr. Carr, much like Crosshair, makes the choice to confront what she's done and try to make a difference, we get a very different story when it comes to Vice Admiral Rampart. In last week's review, I talked about how I thought the Bad Batch would make an effort to free Rampart because he technically didn't make the choice to be there, so he should really have the opportunity to make at least some sort of choice himself. The rest of the Bad Batch ends up incapacitated, so it's not their work so much as Echo's and Omega's to let him out of his cell. But once he is out, he does have the opportunity to make that choice and decide who he wants to be, much like the clones do. All of the clones decide they want to help Echo and Omega, but Rampart decides that they're idiots for wanting to do that, and instead the choices that he makes puts him in direct confrontation with Nala Se. Considering Season 1 ends with Rampart destroying her homeworld, I thought putting them in cells across from each other was a pretty good move by the show, and I'm glad that these stories reached the climax they did. Rampart had every opportunity to just go wait on the ship if he really didn't want to help the clones, but instead he couldn't turn down the possibility that he could get information that might help him get back into favor with the Empire. So this was ultimately his choice to follow Nala Se, and it was his own decisions and greed which led him to his demise. Unfortunately for Nala Se, it also meant that she had no chance of making it out if she wanted to destroy her research, but I don't think she harbored any illusions that she was going to make it under the facility when she made the decision to go and destroy that research in the first place, whether Rampart was there or not. Jumping back a little bit to when Hunter, Wrecker, and Crosshair are taken out by the CX troopers, I think there's something here which does reinforce what the show is doing thematically, but which might irritate some fans. And I think there are a few different approaches to the irritation here, so stay with me on this. There was certainly a lot of build-up in the community, myself included, on who some of the CX troopers might be. And even in the episode, we had one of the clone troopers talking about how the conditioning on the CX troopers was done to the clones that Hemlock thought might be particularly useful. So I personally really did think that one of the CX troopers might end up being a clone we'd met before, in particular Commander Cody, and then there was of course all the speculation about Tech still being alive. And I don't think you had to necessarily buy into any particular theories or care too much about theories in order to feel like maybe something more could have been done with setting up the CX troopers before. But I think thematically the answer here is a lot more simple. What the CX troopers represent is what the Bad Batch might be if they were stripped of the identity and choices they were making. So by tying an identity to who they were before, you're divorcing that a bit from the power it might otherwise have if you were explicit about who they used to be. As much as lore freaks like me may want an answer to everything, sometimes that's just not necessarily how storytelling works, and that's part of the point. So while I don't think anyone in the Bizarro Bad Batch was necessarily anyone in particular that we're already familiar with, I also don't necessarily think it wasn't a reconditioned version of anyone in particular we may already be familiar with, and yeah, that possibly even still includes Tech. Whoever those CX troopers had been before, they weren't that anymore, and that represents some of the most evil things the Empire can do, is strip these people of their agency entirely, and turn them into the tools that they'd always hoped the clone troopers would be. But at the same time, speculation is always fun, and I will never stop doing it. For me at least though, the important thing here when it comes to this kind of speculation is that I do it because it is fun, and I think when it comes to Star Wars it's true often enough that it is still worth doing and thinking that it might have a shot at something like this being true. But I also think sometimes people get a little bit too invested in these theories and then judge the quality of the show on whether or not their personal theories come true. And I really don't think that improves the experience for anyone. In a similar vein, we get to the death of Scorch. In the short time since the episode is finished, I have seen a few people complaining about how Scorch was done dirty, and I don't really agree with that from the perspective of, oh, this was an older character, and he should have been used to do more. I do, however, agree with it from the perspective that the commandos should have been used a little bit differently. Whether this had been Scorch or any other commando with any other name, I'd been hoping that he was there because we'd get at least some more of a look into some of the clones that had been in the Empire, and while we had a little bit of that with Wolf, I feel like the show never really acknowledged that the commandos were clones in the same way as the other clones were. The Bad Batch did deal with Gregor making it out, so there is at least some representation of commando agency, but beyond that the commandos just turned into another Imperial soldier type, and for a show that's about the clones' place in the Empire, not having that acknowledged a little bit more is a bit disappointing. There is of course still a lot left open with the clone storyline overall, especially without Rex being involved in this extraction, but I'm okay with that being left open like this. I feel like there's still plenty of opportunities to have Rex's story explored elsewhere, and he didn't necessarily need to be involved here, although it being more of a broad clone-related effort would have been a nice thematic touch as well. The biggest area where I felt unfulfilled was in wrapping everything up at the end. The scene with Hunter and Omega when Omega was running off to join the rebellion I did think was really nice and was a really good way to cap it off between those two characters. But it also felt like some of the other ones didn't really get the send-off that they might have deserved. We saw the reunion between Omega and Hunter and Crosshair, but the reunion with Wrecker happened entirely off-screen and there was never actually a scene with Omega and Wrecker together after that either. Like I said, the epilogue wrapping that up with just Hunter was fitting, but having even just a little bit more interaction on Pabu might have been nice, instead of just having Omega resting her eyes while Crosshair and Wrecker come into frame. The wrap-up does make it seem like we're not going to be seeing too much more out of Omega during this period. So in particular, the theories which I thought were likely of Omega heading off with Ventress and being the center of the next animated show are very much not happening. Michelle, the voice actress for Omega, has talked about how there were some other potential ideas for what Omega's role might be going forward that weren't gone forward with. So I think there may have been a point where Omega was a bit more active in this period, and we know she is going to go off and join the Rebels now, but I also think it does work thematically for the show really well for them to be in a position where the Bad Batch, including Omega, is able to choose to live a quiet life that they have earned. Those are my thoughts on the finale, though once again I did really enjoy the show as a whole, and I'm looking forward to see what the future of Star Wars animation has in store. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.